So we have a lot of chaos going on in the world, and there is a way to unify that is very spiritual, and it's being overlooked. And if we would each apply it individually, we could make a lot of progress. And that's really all we can do, is learn how to apply it individually. The problem is the world seems so chaotic, and it seems like we're so far apart that we'll never be able to unify it somehow. But I'm going to start with this quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald, American author, Great Gatsby, who said this: "The test of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind and still retain the ability to function." First-rate intelligence means you can look at two opposing ideas and in somehow, some way, it still makes some sort of sense to you. Okay? So we're going to be talking about a lot of that kind of stuff, but how are we going to unify in this country if we keep arguing for our point of view being correct? I'm right and you're wrong. We're never going to get anywhere with that. One of my favorite ways to look at that is what happened when Jesus was about to be crucified, and Peter told him, "We're going to stop that." I'm paraphrasing. And he shouldn't get crucified. They're not going to do that to you. You're our master, you're our savior. And what does Jesus say to Peter? "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you're focused on the affairs of man, and I'm focused on the affairs of God." The fact is, politics in particular is the affairs of man. And most of us, as men and women, people on this earth, are focused on affairs of people. Well, the way out of this situation, the way to get ourselves to a place of healing is to actually focus on the things of God. Problem is, we argue about that. What's God? Is there a God or is there not a God? Well, I'm going to tighten that up. I've got God in quotes. You could call that source. Source of energy, source of spirit. You could call it higher power. But the word I like to use that's simple and everybody can agree with is God is love. It happens to be 1 John 4:8. God is love. I've never met somebody that disagreed that love exists. Love exists. It's a thing. And I could do hours on just love alone. We're going to do a little bit today. But it's a big thing, and if we can all agree that love exists, then that's our starting point. Love is a thing. Now, I drew a diagram here. Hopefully this diagram makes you think of something. Looks like a little bit like the sun. That's what it's supposed to look like, at least. And I want you to think of it as a love diagram, just like the sun. Now, if you go outside and look up at the sun, you can see the sun. But isn't the sun touching us? How does it touch us? All the rays coming from the sun come down here, and we can feel the sun even though it's way up there. Well, all of us come from this source. God, higher power, love. We all come from that same source. That's our origin. And we are all manifestations of that. The Tao Te Ching says that the source is the mother of 10,000 things, and here we are. It's the source, this one thing, but it leads to all the many things, okay? We are spiritual beings having a human experience, and all of us come from this source. We come from this source called love. We all come from it. That's our origin. The Buddha teaches something called Rigpa. And Rigpa is basically the origin of your mind. It's well behind mind, in fact. The mind that we're used to, the human mind, really the ego mind in many ways. Rigpa is behind that. It's even behind consciousness. It's pure awareness. And there's no labels. What if God is various rays coming from the sun? We've got our age, and we have our religion, and political affiliation, sexual orientation, gender, and race, and addiction, and we have all these experiences. And some of us have some have the other, some are tall, some are short, some are fat, some are thin, but all of it comes from the same source. Rigpa, from the point of view of Rigpa, you drop all your labels and all your clingings. The Buddha would call all of this stuff clinging, the clinging mind, insisting on having your own way. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm bad, I am this, I'm that. It's all clinging. But who you really are, Rigpa, is behind all of that, and it's really what the source right here is. Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, says, when you perceive the unity existing in separate creatures, here we have separate creatures. You might have black versus white, Republican versus Democrat, tall versus short, Muslim versus Christian versus Jew versus atheist. Well, all these differences, those are called separate creatures. Krishna says when you perceive the unity existing in the separate creatures and how they expand from unity, you attain the infinite spirit. Does attaining the infinite spirit sound like a good idea? Yeah, it produces a chemical cascade inside the brain. It's a good high. It's the kingdom of heaven. Jesus says it's inside you. It's nirvana. And it's an experience that you can have because you must perceive the unity in all creatures. And that means it doesn't matter the race or the gender or the orientation or the political affiliation. Your job is very clear to perceive the unity in all things, not the differences. If we seek to see the differences in all things, we'll never get there. We must seek to attain the infinite spirit by seeing the unity. The Tao Te Ching, Chinese philosophy, 13th verse says, man's true self is eternal. What does that say about age? Right? Whatever age you think you are, you're not that age. That's an ego way of looking at yourself. That's your physical body's age. But you, however, man's true self is eternal. And yet man thinks, I am a body and I will soon die. If we have no body, what calamities can we have? I mean, if I think of myself as Steve, physical being, a lot of stuff can happen to this. But what if I'm not this? What if I'm something behind that? What if I actually come from this source? What if I am a spiritual being having a physical experience? If that's what I am, what could really happen to this? Nothing. No calamities can happen. But when you see yourself as a body, you say, I will soon die. But one who sees himself as everything is fit to be a guardian of the world. One who loves himself as everyone is fit to be a teacher of the world. Right? What does that mean? Once you see yourself as not separate from other beings, and this works, believe me, it would work politically if we could pull it off. It certainly would work with religions. It works in relationships. Every individual that does this themselves, they get to feel the unity. They can feel the connection. What happens to stress? It goes way down. All you're going to do is see the love in each other instead of the division. And if you see yourself as physical, you're going to see yourself as the labels. This is our journey to get over those labels. It's the worst addiction man has. We are addicted to the labels of race and gender and sexual orientation and political affiliation and religion. That's what we're addicted to. And I know addicts are addicted to calling themselves an addict. That doesn't work either. You're none of those things. What you are is the spiritual essence. Back here at the origin of all things. That's where we start. That's what we are. So what's our collective goal? Again, every prophet teaches this one way or another. Apostle Paul in Philippians 2:12 says, work out your own salvation. Work out your own salvation. That means focus on yourself. And Jesus says, don't worry about a speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your own. That means worry about yourself, right? What does that mean using this drawing? Whatever your race, whatever your gender or your orientation or your political affiliation or your religion, your job is to walk that back and see yourself as a spiritual being freed of those labels. And if you could do that, you could understand why somebody who might be polar opposite you, completely different than you, in race and in gender and in religion in particular, you could see someone as still coming from the same source. And so I might have to walk back from this direction, and that person might be diametrically opposed from me, and they're going to have to walk it back from their direction. Does it do me any good to worry about his journey? No, this is Buddha's Kalama Sutta. He says all of us have our own individual path. And that's why Jesus says, do not judge by mere appearances, judge correctly. Mere appearances is all this flesh stuff. You know what we need to do during this pandemic? I'll tell you, I know what we need to do. I don't know what we need to do. I have some opinions, but it's relative to what Steve has gone through. You guys all might have a bunch of different opinions. And they're all good based upon your experience. All of our life experiences come from our relative experiences. Where we were born, the skin that we were given at birth, the gender we were given, right? The socioeconomic status, the religion we were born into, all of that. And that fractures us. We get way out here and then we cling to that stuff. But to drop all of it, to get to the Rigpa, is working out your own salvation. The Buddha's last words, strive for your own liberation with diligence. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead it says, recognition and liberation are simultaneous. Well, recognition of what? For me to recognize I'm not a white guy, and to say look at a black man and not see him as a black man, but to see the essence behind him, that is liberation. And vice versa. In every single issue you bring up, if we can do it on that, you don't have to agree with the other person. Right? You don't have to vote for the other person. Just understand that you're united in that essence. Now you lead with love. As Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of heaven and all the rest will be added to you. It's great mental health, and you're way less likely to get into trouble if you see another person as coming from the same home base that you started from. All of us are playing the same game. Now, maybe you've done some more work than the other guy, maybe, and you're closer to that truth. Well, what do you have to do? Let him grow. Love is patient, as we're about to talk in a minute. Let other people develop and have their own process too. But you can do so trusting the whole time that they have a process that they have to walk back. And let's say you have an enemy that seems so far away from you and what you consider to be truth. Well, rest assured, if they don't get rid of all their labels and all their judgments and all their feelings of superiority or inferiority, if they don't get back to that, they're going to have to keep looping around and round and round again. There's a lot of karma to be paid for somebody who's anti everybody else. Okay? Trust that. That's why Buddha says, strive for your own liberation, and Paul says, work out your own salvation. Your job is to keep doing you. So how do we do this? Let's go to 1 Corinthians 13. There's a lot of stuff in that. I could do hours on this. We'll just make it fairly quick. This is read at weddings a lot. Okay? One of my favorite lines in the Bible is, if I have not love, remember, God is love. And love is what we are at essence, and we were made in God's image, which does not make God a man. If we were made in God's image and God is love, guess what that makes us? Love. Okay? I got to stop seeing myself as a white guy. I'm not a white guy, I'm love. Just like all of you are love. That's what we are. And we have all these labels that are throwing us off. Well, if I have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Right? What is that? Should we take that literally? What's a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal? It's the ego. It's the human mind that sees resistance. It's that voice inside your head that's constantly chattering, saying, that's bad, don't like this, don't trust that. This is unfair. Meanwhile, the prophets all come along and say, no, that's not it at all. The universe is unfolding exactly as it should. You either trust that and go with the flow of that, which is, again, what all spiritual teachers teach, to work on the virtues of forgiveness, for example, and patience and acceptance. That's what they teach. And to do so is to recognize that your enemy has to do the same thing. If he doesn't work on forgiveness, pick your political figure that you don't like. If he thinks or she thinks that they're, say, President of the United States or congressman or senator or whatever, that's another label that they're going to have to walk back. Of course, Miracles says, none of us are special, but we're all unique. Love that. None of us are special because we're all love. We're all the same thing. But we're all unique because, like the Tao says, we are differentiated love. And some have this kind of body and some have that kind of body, but it's still all love. If you don't recognize that, you're not love, and you got a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal and it's banging inside your own head. Right? Own it. And if you own it, you're going to work for the unity, and you're going to say, I need to improve on this or that. So, what are some of the definitions of love? In Corinthians, love is patient. Can we all agree that that's a good thing? Of course it is. Love is patient. First definition of love is that it's patient. Your job, how patient are you? How patient am I? This is my job, is to look at myself and say, can I improve my patience? Or should I overreact to things quickly? Now, if I'm owning it and working on my own salvation and striving for my own liberation, I'm going to worry about my patience more than yours. That's what I need to do. Don't worry about the speck in your eye when I've got a log in my own. If I'm impatient, I'm not going to accuse you of being impatient. That's my job, work on patience. Love is kind. This is taught to kindergartners. We know love is kind, and I don't even need to tell you what kind is. You know what kind is. How kind are you? And before you worry about whether or not the other guy's being kind, make sure you're being kind. That's your own salvation. That's your own liberation. Love does not envy or boast. This is pretty particular. For the Christian, this is a big deal. Nobody should be boasting. It says throughout that good book, no man shall boast. And you think you got it right, you better not be boasting about it, because that very book says not to do that. No man shall boast, no man shall envy, which means you're right where you need to be, again, spiritually speaking. Where this gets lost is we spend so much time trying to figure out other people's salvation. We sit back and say, well, why did that guy have to go through that? Or why does that girl go through that? That's you trying to work out their salvation. You're supposed to work out yours. And what do you do if you see someone suffering and someone struggling? Well, if you've got a heart, you're compassionate, and that's working out your own salvation. You don't just disregard it. But if you rush in and accuse the other guy of not being compassionate, I think you got some work to do yourself. I sure know, because the more I stay focused on what I need to do, the more I can feel infinite spirit. And when I don't do it right, boy, do I feel like plummeting. That's why I check out my Dark Night of the Soul video. When you disconnect from this source, if you get disconnected from that, you feel empty and broken. And what are you going to blame? Well, really, it's just your lack of connection. So what we're supposed to be doing is working on our own salvation through being patient, being kind, not envying, not boasting. Love is not arrogant nor rude. All right? If you're arrogant or rude, work on that. Don't tell the other guy he is. Love does not insist on its own way. A little bit of a problem we've got in this country with that. The whole way the political system is set up now is for two sides to argue over man's affairs. Again, Jesus, I am not focused on man's affairs. You are, Satan. Satan is the ego. Satan is the noisy gong and the clanging cymbal. Satan is the thing that says it's different. Satan says you're different than me. Satan would say I'm better than you, or you're better than me. That's what Satan does. And Jesus says I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on the affairs of God, which is being patient and kind and not envying and not boasting and not being arrogant, not being rude and not insisting on your own way. That is what love is. Love is not irritable or resentful. Right? Straight up. Not irritable or resentful. Which means love is forgiving. If the world's ever going to heal, it's going to be because a lot of people on the level of the individual working on their own sense of forgiveness and their own patience and eliminating their own arrogance and their own irritability. That's why Gandhi says to be the change you want to see in the world, right? Each of us working on our own self. Love hopes and love endures, right? I've done this work for about 20 years now, worked with a lot of people with a lot of different issues, and I'm convinced by now this earth that we're on, it's an endurance test. We got about 80 years, give or take, most people, and it's an endurance test. And guess what happens if you're enduring through life's difficulties? You're earning love. You're doing what Krishna says, attaining the infinite spirit. Because I get inspired by your endurance. I work with people all the time who get through much more difficult things than I could ever possibly imagine. And their endurance inspires me. That's our job, to see each other working on this together. If we don't see it that way, we're disconnected. So I need to pick up from when the camera battery died. And so we'll finish it off by starting with that reminder. We all have a spiritual self, and we have forgotten that. That's what it means when man fell into a deep sleep. The word Buddha means to awaken. Well, what is that spiritual self? Well, it's the center that I drew here. We all come from that source, and then we break off into individuality via things like our ages and our religions and our political affiliations, sexual orientation, gender, race, on and on and on. Those who see the separation in each other, that's where division comes in, and that's ultimately where all our stress comes in, from seeing the differences in each other in some form of a negative way. Well, in order to bridge that gap, especially in today's crazy world, we're going to have to see each other as unified somehow, and it's because we all come from that same source, this little center that I've got here. And so, after we'd gone through all of this, we're ending with this line from the Bible, which I've called the most underrated line, almost any scripture ever. We must give up our childish ways, for we see in a mirror dimly. We see in a mirror dimly. What does that mean? If you see in a clear mirror, it's obvious. You're looking at yourself in a mirror and you can see your reflection. And it's very easy to see that it's you. But a dim mirror, imagine you're looking in a dirty mirror, it's really hard to see what it is that you're looking at. Well, the Bible talks about spiritual things, not physical. And seeing in a dim mirror means we're always looking at a reflection of ourselves, but we can't quite tell. We don't know this. We're looking at a reflection of ourselves because we all come from this source, and then we branch off into gender and sexual orientation, political affiliation, and religion. We branch off into all of that. And then we lose sight of the fact that, wait a minute, I am you. We come from the same source. We're all a piece of God together. But I can't quite see that because I see this body sitting over there, right? And I see this skin color, this race, this gender, this age. You know, I see all these differences. And when I see that, I'm not seeing the true self in myself or the other. It's why it's a dim mirror. I'm not seeing accurately. Giving up childish ways is all this stuff on the perimeter here. It's all the labels that we've slapped onto each other. The maturity that Apostle Paul speaks of is seeing each other spiritually and actually looking beyond age and race, sexual orientation, political affiliation, and all of that. And if we look beyond all of that, we'll see the spiritual aspect. Now, this is a Bible line. talking about seeing in a mirror dimly. Which religions do you suppose also talk about a mirror? All of them, right? Just going to throw two more at you. In Hadith, which is some of Muhammad's teachings, not from the Quran, but they're Muslim teachings. In Hadith, Muhammad says, each of you is the mirror of his brother. So here you've got the Bible saying we see in a mirror dimly, and we have Muhammad saying each of you is a mirror of his brother. And then Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, he who experiences the unity of life sees his own self in all beings, and all beings in his own self. Now the unity comes from this spot right here. And Krishna says, if you experience the unity of life, you see your own self in all beings. That's because you're the spiritual thing. You are the light, as Jesus says. You are this divine energy. Know ye not ye are gods, said Jesus, quoting from the Old Testament. Yes, we are all part of this divine source. And Krishna is saying, when you see all beings in yourself, and you see yourself in all beings, now you've attained the unity. He says that's the infinite spirit. And so what do you have to do? You have to look at each other, every other physical being in the world, and see beyond the illusion of the physical self, and see the spiritual self that's hiding behind it. That's seeing in a mirror dimly. But once you recognize that, the line says we see in the mirror dimly, but then face to face. Once you have the recognition that the physical things that you're seeing is an illusion of some sort, and the spirit, the actual true self, is behind that, now I can see you face to face. No longer is it me assessing you on a level of flesh, whether it's skin color or age or gender or whatever the case may be. Now I've seen beyond that, and we all have this unifying principle here that we can work on. Why is it Buddha's last words were strive for your own liberation with diligence? Because my job, no matter what my labels are, my job is to walk myself back into this place where I know that I'm a spiritual being. That's my liberation. And when I've done that, I can then look out at the world and see the spirit in everything. It's not my job to tell you what to do. Every prophet teaches empowerment. Every prophet teaches some level of forgiveness and mercy and releasing another person from their ignorance of this, right? I shouldn't be telling you that you need to do this. I need to walk it back first. And if I've done that, I'll perceive the unity, and then my liberation is secure. You might call that salvation. That's everybody's job. What makes it fair is that I can see in a world filled with a whole lot of chaos right now, every single human being that feels the division has the same journey to walk that I have to walk. That makes it fair, right? And you might have significantly different levels of understanding of this, but that doesn't change the truth. Gravity is always gravity for everybody on earth. Truth is always truth, and everybody has to walk this path back. So, we see in a mirror dimly means I'm seeing you, I think I'm seeing a flesh self, but I'm actually seeing a reflection of myself somehow. How do we apply that? If I'm in a traffic jam and I see a bunch of cars, I'm not a bunch of cars. I am whether or not I'm patient. If I see a bunch of cars and I feel patient, the cars reflect the fact that I'm patient. If I see a bunch of cars and I start cussing other drivers out and have road rage or whatever, then the cars are showing me that I'm impatient. In the Bible, love is patience, it says in Corinthians, part of the same verse. And the line of cars is telling me that I'm not patient, which means I'm not love. I'm not quite there yet. If I haven't mastered patience, I'm not being love. And so the line of cars is showing me that I'm not love. Now, if you're in an argument with somebody and your resentment towards that other person, you could feel that resentment. That other person is showing you that you haven't mastered forgiveness yet. That other person is showing you that the type of love that you need in order to get to this point, to experience that again, that type of love requires the ability to forgive. And the arguments and the fights that we have throughout the world is demonstrating whether or not you've mastered that. Jesus demonstrates that when he gets crucified. My ability to forgive someone else when they're hurting me. Does that mean that's where everybody's at? If we have a 6-year-old and a kid at school is bullying them, do we tell them, just let them pick on you? Forgive them. And if they beat you up, that's okay. No, we don't say that to a 6-year-old. Different people are at different levels of this. Throughout the world, we've got people who have actually have different skills that they need to be working on. Some people need to work on forgiveness while others need to work on finding their voice, right? Some need to pursue justice. You need to know where you're at. And whatever circumstances come across you, your job is to figure out whether or not you're tapped into love. Your job isn't to determine what the other person should do, right? For everything there's a season. There's a time for forgiveness. There's also a time to riot, right? There's a time to kick everybody out of the temple and call people hypocrites and swine like Jesus did. There's also a time to hug it out and forgive. Your job is to figure out how well you're doing on your pathway and practice forgiveness when you need to, practice justice when you need to, practice courage when you need to. You always have to be love, and that's your job. That's what makes it fair. We see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. If I look out and see love and only love, then I've got it. If I look out and see differences and separation and death, and I feel shame and guilt, then I'm not quite there yet. It's a journey that we're all on together. I'll close with this, that Chinese proverb, we're all on the same journey. Those who blame others have not started. Those who blame themselves are halfway home, and those that blame no one have arrived. Okay? Once we meet back at home base, and we realize that this whole thing was just a bunch of labeling, and we all come out here and we fall asleep to the nature of the true self, and when you wake up again, which every philosophy and spirituality talks about one way or another, when we're enlightened and realize the true nature of the divine self, and then I realize that you've done that too, and we meet back at this home base, we're like, oh my, now I understand. All we had done out of ignorance. It's why we don't have to judge another person by mere appearances. The correct judgment is recognizing that we're all spiritual beings and we're all on the same journey, and all of us are walking and working on that journey together, whether we know it or not.